listener production.
Hello, Natarsha Belling with you, and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, as the federal election looms, we take a look at the top issue affecting voters, the cost of living crisis. While some Australians are struggling to pay their mortgage and everyday bills, there is another section of our community that has given up on owning a home and now have a disposable income to spend. It's being called a two-tier economy and has sparked a new debate on how we manage interest rates, inflation and the property market. But first, let's check this afternoon's headlines this Thursday, the 20th of March. Peter Dutton's Sydney speech has turned chaotic as two protesters hijacked the event, rallying against the opposition leader's pro-nuclear stance. Security wasted no time dragging the protesters out.
I understand that many Australians are unsettled by events abroad and implications.
Mr. Dutton, why are you lying to the Australian people about the cost of nuclear?
It follows Treasurer Jim Chalmers' speech being disrupted by climate change activists just days earlier. The latest employment data has been released, showing almost 53,000 workers lost their jobs last month. But economists aren't too concerned with the unemployment rate steady overall, staying at 4.1%. Experts say the surprise fall in employment was because fewer people were in work or looking for a job, especially older workers. And Australia's 10 wealthiest people have been revealed in this year's Rich List. The elite group is now worth a staggering $250 billion. That's an increase of $20 billion compared to last year. Mining magnate Gina Rinehart again sits at top spot at $45.3 billion, followed by property developer Harry Triguboff in second place and IT entrepreneurs Mike Cannon-Brooks and Scott Farquhar in third and fourth place. Nicola Forrest has made her first solo appearance on the Rich List after splitting with her ex-husband Andrew Twiggy Forrest. Nicola is now Australia's seventh richest person, one spot higher and $1.5 billion wealthier than her former husband. Now it's time to get into our deep dive with Scott Phillips, the Motley Fool's Chief Investment Officer, on our cost of living crisis. New research shows the rate of Australians now behind on their mortgage repayments has increased up to 75% just over the past 2 years. The Federal Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, has flagged more cost of living relief in next week's federal budget, but for many, it's too little too late. While some are struggling to meet basic everyday needs, there is a growing number of younger Australians who have given up hope of the Aussie dream of owning a home and now using their disposable income and enjoying life by going out and travelling. It's called a two-tier economy, and as Scott Phillips explains, it sparked new calls for a complete overhaul on how we manage interest rates, inflation, and the property market. Scott, thanks for joining us. Two-tier economy, this is the new phrase being thrown around at the moment. Can you explain what this is?
Yeah, Tash, g'day. Look, two-tier, two-level, right? And what we're really talking about here is very different economic circumstances being, I'll say enjoyed, but maybe tolerated or dealt with, frankly, by different parts of our society, different parts of our economy. And it really depends. This is not really a new issue, but it's kind of come to a pointy end, particularly as we get to, thankfully, rates have started to fall. But for the longest time, we had people who were benefiting from higher rates. They are savers, retirees, generally superannuants, those with investment portfolios. Then we've got people who are just absolutely drowning in either mortgage debt or really expensive rents. And so in that case, higher interest means higher mortgage repayments. And for renters, they often get forgotten about. Those renters are paying higher rents because their landlords are paying higher mortgage repayments, and those rental prices keep going up. So you've got one economy. And we always do this, right? We aggregate the numbers. So our GDP is growing at X, or national savings is Y, or retail spending is Z. It's all true, except that's a total. It doesn't talk about what you bought or I bought or one of your listeners is buying. We'll have three very different experiences in three very different areas for very different reasons. That combination is really what we're talking about with a two-tier economy, a two-speed economy, we could call it, another way to think about it. But basically, Haves and have-nots is probably too simplistic. It may be not accurate, but it's not far away when you're looking for an analogy.
So the bottom line is when you even go out to restaurants, and it's so important to support local business, there's some people that are drowning in mortgage debt or paying really high rent prices that cannot afford to go out to their local cafe or their local restaurant. But then when you look around, it's jam-packed by a whole generation that have said, you know what, I'm giving up on trying to even save money to get a mortgage and I'm going to enjoy life.
And that's what you've got. You've got both ends of that. So you've got those with money who are saying, well, I'm better off than I was last year. What cost of living crisis? I'm fine. I'll go and keep spending. You then got, as you say, the young people who are like, well, I'm not going to bother saving. And, what's the point? It literally is that kind of, the quiet quitting. We talked about it for work. We're quiet quitting economically. We're quiet quitting around housing. And even that group, frankly, are still stretched because they are paying higher rents, as we pointed out. But that's exactly right. The people who you don't see at those cafes and restaurants are the mid-30s, early 40s groups who are just drowning in mortgage debt, who are just like, I just can't do it, right? I don't have the choice of giving up because I've got a mortgage. I don't have the income of someone who's maybe retired or living on their investment portfolio. And by the way, we need to be careful of the generation wars here. It's no one's fault. It's not boomers versus X versus millennials versus alphas or whatever they are these days. It's just the circumstance. You can, and Commonwealth Bank releases information relatively regularly. And you see the spending change by age cohort. And it's almost a straight line. For the kind of under 25s, they're worst off. Right? They are spending, or the reduction in their spending is biggest of any cohort. And then as you go through the late 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, you go from deeply negative to kind of baseline, same year on year, to actually pretty positive. Again, those people with the means are out there spending. And so that's kind of what we're seeing. And you're right, it is important that we're spending that money because we're seeing the economy grow and hopefully businesses stay alive, people stay in jobs, because that's the flip side. If you don't spend, then those people miss out on their jobs. They're the ones trying to pay the mortgage. So it's a really, really difficult one. But what it does highlight, I think, is the really skewed nature of our society right now. Housing is absolutely at the middle of that one. It just is. It's not the only issue in town, but I've got to say it's probably the biggest one. Without being political, neither party is actually proposing anything meaningful to actually help with the problem. They're promising solutions, in air quotes, that actually just add to demand and look like they're doing something. But until we address housing and the cost of housing, rentals and mortgages, this doesn't change. Once rates come down, people will bid more at auction because they can borrow more. So rates doesn't come down, doesn't even help anything. It's the price of housing itself. That is the core problem. Whether it's supply, whether it's demand, it's all of those things. That's what we have to resolve. Otherwise, we'll be talking about the two-tier economy in another 5 years.
Talking about government, Scott, and policies, there is a school of thought that we actually need to overhaul the way that we try and tackle inflation, because when I found out that it's estimated only 33% of Australians have a mortgage, and when I found that out, I thought, okay, well, if they start to, manipulate interest rates, I'm talking about the Reserve Bank, that actually it's not that effective in bringing down inflation, because you have a whole group of Australians that are not directly affected by the cash rate, because they're certainly not bringing down the interest rates on credit cards, are they?
Mate, tell me about that, man. 25% on a credit card is highway robbery. Look, we haven't got all day. I would happily rant on this for hours, Tash, but I won't. You're right. This is the fundamental problem. Now, it's both bigger and smaller than that in some ways. So a third of us have a mortgage. That's a decent cohort. 1/3 of people are impacted by rates. Don't forget, renters have also been whacked by rates. So that number gets a little bit larger. But also then it gets smaller again, because then think about who is it that's actually going to be hurt by those rates. So if I'm in year 29 of a 30-year mortgage and I bought a house 29 years ago for cents on the dollar compared to what they are now, you can double my repayments. And look, my cost of living, my kind of living standards have increased, and I'm spending money on other things because I'm almost in retirement, done all these things. And increasing my mortgage repayments not a lot, because the money I borrow was so small relative to my current income. I'm still sweet. So even of that third, it's really about 10%, or a third of that third, who are really feeling it. They're the people who bought a house in the last 4 or 5 years.
Yes.
They're the ones who, when you put rates up by 1/4%, get absolutely smashed. The person with a 30-year mortgage and they're paying in year 29, yes, it still goes up by the same proportion, but as a percentage of their income, it's tiny. The renter will absolutely have their rents increase. We've seen that, so they're going to pay some of it as well. But you're right, it's very ineffective, except it's the least ineffective thing that we've tried to do. And this is where you get to government policy. And I will absolutely say I pox on both their houses. It is very, very easy to use what we call fiscal policy, tax and spend, to change demand in the economy, to impact inflation. So what have governments, and both past and present, done? Exactly zero. For all the talk about our focus is on inflation, we're focused on the cost of living, we're doing this, we're doing that. What do we have? A supermarket inquiry, energy rebate to put some money in people's pockets, not really dealing with the issues, and lots of noise about how we're all helping and we're hand in glove with the RBA. The simple reality is they should be using tax and spend policies to help the RBA. The poor Reserve Bank, and look, they get paid enough money, and Michelle Bloch doesn't need my support, but they're the adults in the room. They are literally ones looking around going, well, if you won't do it and you won't do it, I guess it's up to me then. The simple reality is if they had done things differently to change their tax and spend, and by the way, some other regulation around house prices, which we'll get into another day maybe, if they'd done those things, then the RBA wouldn't have had to do as much. The simple reality is rates are higher than they would need to be if governments had stepped up to the plate and said, we will genuinely help. Now, why didn't they? It can't be they don't know. It's got to be electoral reality or their fear of the electorate, some combination of that. If you're generous, you say, well, if they tried to help people, we'd vote them out. Okay, that's kind of the price of doing the right thing. Or you say they didn't want to because they were just fearful of something that might happen. It's impossible to know. What I do know is governments have absolutely been MIA, and the poor mortgage payer, particularly the one who took out a mortgage 5, 6, 7 years ago, they are absolutely carrying 95% of the burden for the rest of us.
Scott, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Tasha.
That was Scott Phillips, Motley Fool's Chief Investment Officer. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'd love you to subscribe or follow us so you don't miss our episodes or our deep dive of the day. You can also follow us on our socials, on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast, and also on TikTok and YouTube. You can just search Listener Newsroom. That's spelled LISTNR. And we'll be back in your feed tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company. See you tomorrow.